My name is Hubert Williams. I'm the president of the Police Foundation in Washington, D.C. This represents the fourth in a series of forums that we've held across the United States on Project Exile. We've held forums in Phoenix, Arizona. We had one in Newark, New Jersey. And the third one was where? Boise, Idaho. No, it was Omaha, Nebraska.
All run together.
In any event, we're simply delighted to be here and to have so many people come out. I'd like to, from the outset, tell you that the Police Foundation, in partnership with the Office of Community Policing and the Justice Department, is sponsoring this program. And I'd like to ask the director, who we're honored to have here, Carl P., to just stand up so that everyone can see you. Thank you. This is really a pretty informal session. Our purpose here is to provide information to you about a project that has grown in scope and changed in somewhat through the administration. It's become the Safe Neighborhoods Program. We'll talk to you a lot about this, but I would like to begin by just asking everyone to introduce themselves. Now, Mr. Pete has already introduced himself, and I'd like to ask the gentleman here to introduce himself, and then we'll go around the table this way, and we'll go this table, and just after we begin the process, I'll make a few remarks, and we'll begin to the opening of our program.
Earl Hamilton, Police Foundation, Washington, D.C.
David Buchanan, Cops Office, Department of Justice.
Billy Christian, Children's Aid Society of Southeastern Michigan.
Cal Williams, Children's Aid Society.
This table.
Chuck Bridgewater, 13th Precinct, representing Commander Genius Hicks.
Reverend Griffin, Pastor Rosa Sherrod, Church of God in Christ.
David Parker, Director of Public Safety, Redford.
Jerome Drain, Highland Park Operation Weed and Seed.
April Walton, April Weed.
John Leacher, Romulus PD. Damian Hall, Romulus Police Department.
Linda Myers, Detroit Police Department, Chief Oliver.
Chuck Barbieri, 4th Precinct, Detroit Police.
Brenna Hamilton, 4th Precinct, Community Relations.
This table.
Karen Dumas, Executive Director of Community Relations for Mayor Kilpatrick.
Kizzy Montgomery from the Mayor's Office, Mayor and Dumas Assistant.
Megan Norris, Chair of the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners.
Maurice Morton, Wayne County Prosecutor's Office.
Nosiba Gordon, Project Century Coordinator for the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Pam Thompson, Project Safe Neighborhoods Coordinator, U.S. Attorney's Office.
Mike Duggan, Wayne County Prosecutor.
Good morning, I'm Greg Holly. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Detroit Field Division.
And the table here.
Rick Eshman, Berkeley Public Safety. Ray Howard, Berkeley Public Safety. Marlon Benson, Oak Park Public Safety.
Reggie Phillips, Deputy Chief, Southfield Police Department.
Letitia Williams, Director of Public Safety, University of Detroit.
Tom Dennison, Livonia Police Department.
Jeff Peter from Livonia PD.
And the last table in the back.
Lieutenant Harold Nava, Michigan State Police Detroit Post.
Commander Pam McLean, representing the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Robert Connor.
John Williams, ATF.
Vera Fedor, Public Information Officer for ATF.
Lieutenant Dwayne McKissick, Training Bureau, Detroit Police Department.
Lieutenant Aaron Robbins, Detroit Police Department, Training Bureau.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to just make a few comments in the beginning. We have, over the last 30 years or so, observed a number of very interesting and exciting programs. We've also seen a shift in the direction of law enforcement towards community policing as opposed to the more traditional approach taken to public safety. There's always this equation of the police and the community both playing very important parts in the crime resolution problem. When you take a look at programs that have been successful, you will see that all of those programs have some common components. And one of the things that is common is that if you're going to have a comprehensive program, you must be able to overcome the obstacles of the insularity of the organization sometimes that we represent. We have to find ways in which to link more effectively with the communities that we service. The people are important parts of the crime resolution problem. Public safety is not only something that we do for the people, but the people in community has to play a vital role. And community policing is about the establishment of partnerships with the community. I'm so pleased to see the Reverend here and other people here from throughout our law enforcement community. Another critical factor that we've had to address is this issue of how do we come together and combine our resources into a common attack against crime and violence. No institution in our society can address this alone. We are increasingly learning that the effectiveness of any program, it requires the cooperation of people from different disciplines, from different institutions. And we have to find some way to pull these resources together in a common link so that it's focused on the issues that we're concerned about. Now, the interesting thing about Project Exile, as these gentlemen sitting at the table will begin to tell you the story of Richmond, Virginia, is that they faced all of the kind of problems that we're accustomed to. And I remember when I first heard about the program down in Richmond, Virginia, David Hicks was making a presentation. David will be introduced later, but he's a Commonwealth attorney for Richmond. And after he introduced the program, his particular part of it, the thing that struck me was, how did you deal with the credits? You know, when you, in law enforcement, we have issues with credit. You know, detectives like to hold on to their informants. They don't want to tell people who they are or what they know. Patrol officers in the field want to make certain that they get the credit for what you do. When you have multiple agencies working in concert, how do you mete out the credits? Who gets the glory when the big bus comes? So David's response was, hey, that's a great question, but it's really only one side of the equation. What about the heat when the heat comes? Who takes the blame when things go wrong? So how do we combine our resources when we have very important federal agencies, county agencies, and municipal agencies with tremendous resource and insights and knowledge and skills working singularly as an entity, and they're only interacting on the margins? How can we pull these institutions together into a common framework where we can attack the problem of guns and violence? So we're not really here to tell you that this is a magic approach. We have really got the answer to everything. Just listen to this. But what we are here to tell you, as the insights and experiences gained in Richmond, Virginia, between the United States Attorney's Office, the Commonwealth Attorney, and the police chief that was there at the time, will enrich your insights about how to overcome some of these obstacles and provide you with some ideas on how to improve the city's efforts to deal with guns and violence here in Detroit, Michigan. So without any further comment, I would like to introduce to you the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Mr. Jim Comey.
I'm a Fed, so I want to make clear I get all the credit and none of the blame. Let's get that right from the start. I'm a New Yorker, and I'm a New Yorker now. I'm the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, but I spent 9 years in Richmond, Virginia, 5 of them as the Managing Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Richmond U.S. Attorney's Office, which was a branch office in the Eastern District of Virginia. We had grew to about 18 criminal prosecutors in that office. And what I want to talk to you about is the Richmond experience from the perspective of a federal prosecutor. And I want to make clear, I want to emphasize something Hubert said. I'm here to talk about Richmond. I live in a very different place now with a very different crime problem and a whole different mix of folks, as you might imagine, in New York City. It's complicated beyond my wildest imagination. But it has different responses to crime and different community elements. It's a whole different thing. And the reason I say that is, I don't want you to think I'm here saying, here's what you need to do in Detroit. I wouldn't do that in New York. I haven't stood up and said, look, here's what we did in Richmond, you need to do that in Detroit. In New York. But as Hubert said, I think that it is valuable to hear what worked in a particular place that may not translate exactly to wherever you are, but some of the elements are important, and some of them I've tried to replicate in New York. And I'll have to see how much success we have. Let me start by telling you the situation in Richmond in the fall of 1996, when David Hicks was the district attorney, called the Commonwealth's attorney there, an elected official, and Jerry Oliver was the police chief in Richmond. Richmond, Virginia is a city of about 200,000 souls, and it would be a much bigger city anyplace else in the world. And David Hicks will talk to you some about that. It is essentially the whole of a donut surrounded by two big suburban counties that have more people, each county, than the city does, about 250,000 in each of the suburban counties. The Richmond crime graph was upside down in the fall of 1996. And for that reason, the Attorney General, then Janet Reno, designated Richmond as one of 11 special cities in the United States. And she did not mean that in a nice way. As most of you know, in the early and mid-1990s, most cities' crime graphs were going like this. Violent crime was dropping in all categories. Richmond's, as I said, looked like it was upside down. It was going the wrong way. Homicides were going up dramatically, robberies, crimes with guns, assaults, everything was going in the wrong direction. In a city of 200,000 souls, there were 160? 160 homicides in 1994. And if you do the math, I don't know what Detroit's population is, but 200,000 is not a big group of folks to have 160 homicides. And the situation was that almost all of them were homicides committed with a firearm. Almost all of them were situations involving a victim who was a young African-American male and a perpetrator who was a young African-American male. A huge number of them were simply what the police, in the gallows humor that only police officers can make work, they were Ford homicides, found on road dead. No particular motive, couldn't say it was a drug-related shooting, but here is a 20-year-old black male who's in a neighborhood that's not his own, in the middle of the street, and he's dead. He's been shot at 3 o'clock in the morning. It became such a routine in Richmond, Virginia, that the community, in a way, became numb to it. And the police department, the criminal justice system, was simply overwhelmed by the amount of violence on the streets. And so what happened was the Attorney General designated these 11 cities, and I don't know whether Detroit was one of them, and said, you are a very special city. You need to figure out what the problem is, you federal prosecutor, and whether you can make a contribution to reducing violence in the city. And so what we did was we got a group of folks together, all the federal agencies, including ATF, which came to be hugely important to the city of Richmond, the police department, state police, all the players in the criminal justice system. We sat around a table and said, let's talk about Richmond, and why is it so screwed up? Why is there so much violence here? And one of the things that kept emerging from these discussions was guns, guns, guns. Every criminal in Richmond had a gun. The gun had become an article of clothing in Richmond, Virginia. The average felon, when he got dressed to go out at night, put on shoes, socks, pants, belt, gun, with equal amounts of reflection. They gave no more thought to whether to put the gun in the waistband than they did as to whether they should wear brown shoes or black shoes that night. It was simply something you always did. And because the gun was here, or in the car console, simply an accessory, you know what happened. Every human altercation ratchets up to the most lethal available weapon. Only rocks are available, people throw rocks at each other. But every altercation in Richmond, because the gun was an article of clothing, ratcheted up to a shootout. We had killings over cover charges, over sideways looks at girlfriends, over flagrant fouls in basketball games, over drug deals, as you know, is all too familiar. Whether it's a beat bag was sold, or money was not paid, or simply they just didn't like what somebody had done, or the way they looked. so somebody was shot. And Richmond is, in a way, a terrifying situation. And I once made the mistake of saying this, and someone said I was coming out for organized crime. But very disorganized crime in Richmond, Virginia. No street gangs to speak of, certainly none of the organized crime that I encounter in New York. Every entrepreneur with a box of baking soda and a kilo of cocaine and a gun became a crack dealer. And the recipe, as you might imagine, that mix of drugs, guns, and intense poverty, intensely concentrated, was a deadly mix. Richmond, Virginia is a beautiful, beautiful city. I hope our remarks don't deter you from visiting it. It's a spectacular place. And it's an incredibly safe place. A lot of elements of the community in Richmond, Virginia have no connection to violence. The violence tends to be concentrated in the area where the poverty is intensely concentrated. And if I had a map, I could quickly draw you 3 circles and show you where the violence was. And Richmond's racial mix is really 2 groups, white and black. And David Hicks will give you a tour of the city that he knows so much better than I in terms of its racial divisions. But the neighborhoods were almost entirely African American and concentrated where the housing projects had been placed during Richmond's ugly past. And so that was the situation we encountered. And we kept hearing guns, 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 guns. And so we thought, you know, maybe what we can do as federal prosecutors is make a contribution on the gun side. We essentially had a public emergency in Richmond, and we thought, hey, what if we do something really different? Federal prosecutors have always done gun cases. And like all good federal prosecutors, we tended to look to pick the low-hanging fruit. We would charge people who had 3 prior violent felonies or who were serious players hooked up with a gang that we were investigating. And so we kind of work around the tree and take the really big pieces of fruit that needed to be taken off. And so we thought, hey, wait a minute, what if we decide to take the entire tree? What if we take every gun possession crime in the city of Richmond, Virginia, and prosecute it federally? Because we knew that Congress had given us the tools to reach almost any gun possession crimes. I mean, most of the folks in this room probably know this off the top of your head, but it is a federal crime to be a felon in possession of a weapon, to be a drug user in possession of a firearm, to be an illegal alien in possession of a firearm, to be, this is my personal favorite, a mental defective in possession of a firearm. And I've never found one, believe it or not. I don't know exactly what that means. To be someone who's been previously convicted of domestic violence, even if it's a misdemeanor, in possession of a firearm. And then the core violation, which carries the biggest hit, it's a federal crime for someone to use, carry, or possess a firearm during a drug trafficking crime. And that is a drug dealer to have a weapon in the course of his drug crime. That was an important violation. It's called 924C because it carried with it a 5-year and up mandatory term in federal prison. The other thing the federal prison offered is that the federal sentencing regime is real sentencing. And I don't know Michigan's situation, but parole was abolished in 1987 in the federal system. And so every inmate sentenced to a year in jail is going to serve 12 months less, perhaps 15%, 52 days a year for good time. So when you hit somebody in the federal system, you know exactly what they're going to get. So we had the tools, theoretically. We had another tool that is incredibly strong in the federal system, and that is pretrial detention. There is a presumption against release for a whole host of criminals, particularly drug dealers and people involved with crimes of violence. And we hold people at a much greater rate than any local criminal justice system. And so this isn't rocket science. What we thought was, look, David Hicks and his prosecutors are overwhelmed with homicide prosecutions. They've got to focus on those. Why don't we try something and send, by doing tons of gun cases, a shockwave through the criminal community? And maybe, just maybe, if we lock up enough guys with guns, we'll make the rest of them think more about the gun than about their shoes or their pants. And if the gun becomes a big enough liability in their mind's eye, maybe they won't carry it. Maybe they'll leave it at home. Because here's what we thought. Most people don't go out at night thinking they're going to kill somebody. I mean, I live in a place where we actually have guys who sit around a table and say, let's kill Vinny. Is everybody free Wednesday night? We're going to whack Vinny. That does not happen in a place like Richmond, Virginia. There are no Sopranos in Richmond, Virginia. Instead, what happens in Richmond, Virginia is what I described. The peace is there. I'm just going out. I'm going to, hang out with my friends. What'd you say to me? What? And we have a shootout. So we thought, if they're afraid of us on the gun, maybe they'll think, hey, we're not planning on killing anybody tonight. I'll leave the gun at home. And another reason that a lot of the criminals carried guns was every other criminal had a gun. And so we feel, I gotta have mine because he's gonna have his. So we thought maybe we can impose sort of a stand down. If people get the sense the gun's a big enough liability, maybe everybody will say, geez, you know, I'll put it someplace. I'll hide it someplace. I can go get it if I need it. If I need to kill somebody, I'll go and get it. And we thought, hey, that will make a difference right there, because fewer people will die if people have to go get the weapon and bring it back. So yeah, that was the theory. And we didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it because we were in such a dire situation. So here's what happened. David Hicks gave one of his prosecutors to work in my office. ATF agreed to spearhead this. And we lined up, obviously the Richmond Police Department was hugely supportive. The state police agreed to contribute 2 state troopers. And the FBI agreed a little later in the process to get involved because they were the people with dough to help us fund a place to house everybody together. And we came up with a name, Project Exile. Something else that wasn't given a lot of thought. The notion that was trying to be conveyed by the name was, if you're a criminal with a gun in Richmond, Virginia, you have forfeited your right to be in this community, and we're going to exile you from this community. We're going to remove you from this community. So we were planning on doing this maybe later in the year in 1997. The homicide numbers got so bad at the end of 96 and the beginning of 97 that we rushed it into production. And we kicked it off right about February 28th, I remember the date, of 1997, and we indicted 50 gun cases federally as part of the first batch. And we then did about 250 through the remainder of that year. And the way it worked was, we didn't have the resources to take people directly into federal custody if they were caught with a gun on the street. So what would happen is, the normal process would start. The police officers would make the arrest. The case would be started in state court with David Hicks as prosecutor shepherding it. We would quickly review the police reports to see if it fit federal prosecution criteria. And then we would lodge a federal charge, drop the state charge, and bring them into our custody. That usually required a rearrest, because they had been released on bond in the state system. We would have to go out, ATF and the state police and the Richmond police go out and rearrest them. We originally thought that was going to be a huge hassle. That ended up being very, very valuable, because when guys were rearrested, what did we find? Another gun and drugs. And so it was hard for them to say, you know, the police had lied when they found a gun on them the first time, because now we've got a whole different set of agents found the guy with a gun. And then we would bring them in, and we'd seek to detain them, because remember, that was part of the shockwave we wanted to send through the community. And we were hugely successful. In the first year of Project Exile, 85% of the defendants charged federally were detained, held without bond. And you can't imagine, and frankly we didn't, the effect that had in the criminal community. Because they were so used to being brought by the police to the city courthouse, I'll be right back. And they go in and they don't come back. And that produced all communities gossip and talk. The criminal community is no different. So people would talk about it. We'd start to hear stories, and we started to become more frightening than we actually are. Not all that frightening, but people would be, when they hear from the police that this arrest, you're going federal, this is an exile case. We had one guy turn and throw up, and because they were so terrified in their mind's eye of the federal system. So that was 1997. We started doing a ton of cases, hoping that the message would get out through the criminal community. And then, so that's the first element of Project Exile in Richmond. We did maniacal federal prosecution of gun possession crimes. We dropped all intake guidelines, and we said we will do every single case in federal court. And I'll talk about some of the challenges of that later. That was the first element. The second element happened almost by accident. The guy that was spearheading it from my office, a fellow named David Schiller, a white-collar crime prosecutor, who I asked to be involved in this because he's a person of tremendous energy and commitment. And he had applied that to fraud and healthcare fraud and bankruptcy fraud for most of his career. And when he got his teeth in this, he was the same lunatic he had been on white-collar stuff, except he's our lunatic. And he started shepherding these cases through and going down and doing all the initial appearances and handling them. And then he had a chat with a friend of his who was a lawyer in town, who was asking what he was up to. And he said, I'm doing something totally different now. And he explained just what I explained to you. Here's what we're trying to do. And he said, I wonder if we could buy a billboard to let the community know, the good folks, that we're doing something, that we're trying to accomplish something. Because as you might imagine, Richmond's good folks were very disheartened, as were law enforcement people in Richmond. And so he talked to his friend who said, I'm dating a woman who works at an advertising agency here in town. And we were very lucky that Richmond had a world-class advertising agency called the Martin Agency, which does, as I call advertising, it's sort of the evil science. They do, Lay's potato chips and Seiko watches, and they get you to buy stuff you don't really need. And so he said, why don't we go talk to her, ask her how we buy a billboard. So they went over and saw her, Barbara, then Thornhill. She changed her name when she and the lawyer got married. And one of the other benefits of Project Exile. And so they sat down and they explained this whole thing I just explained to you. We're trying to change a culture. We're hoping to send a shockwave, all that sort of thing. And she said, all right, now listen, you morons. First of all, you don't buy billboards. Other people own them. You rent them. And second, you're trying to change culture. That's what we do. We in advertising are the most powerful tool ever devised for the manipulation or changing of human culture. And we believe it works. And that's why people spend millions of dollars for 30 seconds at the Super Bowl. So Britney Spears can jump around on a beach to get you to buy Pepsi. And so she said, tell me again. And they sat down. She said, how about this? How about we design an advertising program for you to sell this product that you have? And this product that you have is fear, is deterrence. You want to sell something, not to the good people. Remember, he wanted to get the billboard to show the good folks we were doing something. He said, no, you have a product to sell to the criminals. And it was sheer genius. And that's why I say our part of it was not rocket science, but this was the cool part. And so she said, here's what we'll do. We need to find a way to get the message out to the community, the criminal community. Let's design a slogan for you guys. And so there's lots of back and forth. She heard the explanation about that 924C violation, that because so many of the people we were arresting were drug dealers with guns, most of them were getting charged with this 5-year mandatory minimum charge, this 924C charge. And so she said, how about this? An illegal gun gets you 5 years in federal prison. And their idea was, look, it needs to be simple. It can't be sponsored by anybody, sponsored by Kroger's or Pepsi or CSX or something, because that'll distract from the message. It needs to be scary. It needs to be simple. Now, I had all kinds of problems with this, as you might imagine, because I'm a lawyer. And so I sat down with them and said, look, no, this federal sentencing guidelines determine the sentence. So some guys are going to get more than this, some are going to get less than this. It depends upon your acceptance of responsibility and your criminal history. And she said, look, is this a fair average? I said, yeah, I think it's a fair average. She said, well, I'm here to tell you that this slogan meets the standards of advertising, the ethical standards. And I said, that's a high bar. Oh, we're going to hold ourselves to that standard. But I was nervous about this 5 years. And what was amazing was, after 5 years doing Project Exile, the average sentence handed out was 61 months. 5 years and 1 month, after almost 1,000 defendants. And we didn't screw with the numbers. It worked out beautifully. The other thing she suggested is you need a number, you need a telephone number. Because some good people are going to see this and want to take action. And you don't want to send a message to the good folks that we don't care about you. So let's include a number. So the number is 780-1000. There's an organization in Richmond, and maybe you have one here in Wayne County, called Crime Stoppers, which is a citizens organization that pays money, and it's an anonymous tip organization. It's not a police organization. They will feed information to the police, and that's their number. And everybody in Richmond knew that number because Crime Stoppers was a big advertiser on buses and places like that. So anyhow, and this was the deal. So they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to see if we can't get you out there somehow to sell this message. Now the big problem was we had no dough. Back in those days, the Department of Justice had no money. Well, they had money, they just wouldn't give it to us. That nobody was interested in giving us government money for a program like this. And there was a guy who ran a bunch of those gas station grocery stores. In Richmond, they call them stop and robs. That's not the official name. And so he talked about someone on the front lines of gun crime and violent crime. And so he said, I'll kick in $15,000 because I think that I would like to be part of this kind of advertising. And so they had 15 grand. So these geniuses at the advertising agency did a couple of things. They went to the people that, and it turns out there's a big company that owns most billboards in the United States. And they went to them and they said, look, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to accomplish something good. Can you give us some freebies? And they, being business people, said, not quite free, but if you buy 8, I think it was, we'll give you 7 for free. And the reason they were willing to do that was, where did we want to advertise? We want to advertise where most other folks don't want to advertise. We want to advertise in the poorest neighborhoods in Richmond, where the folks were dying. And so we got 15 billboards in the hardest hit neighborhoods in Richmond, Virginia, that said just this, huge versions of this. Okay? That's the first thing they did. And then they did something else that you won't be able to see, but this is a business card that is essentially, not essentially, it is this, just a little glossy. They printed up 20,000 of these, and we gave them to the best messengers for advertising in the world, the police department's police officers. Each police officer got a stack of these things and was told, give these out. You know, give them to good people, but especially give them to people you think are up to no good. And so they handed them, and gave them out. And they went out, talk about targeted advertising. They went out where we wanted them to go out. And the one thing that the police department pointed out to me that I hadn't even imagined, they never found these on the street. Nobody ever took them and dropped them. I don't know why that is, but I wish we had barcoded some of these things, because we found them all over the country. We found them in a search that ATF did in California. We found them in New York. They sort of spread out, and I'd love to know how they got from Richmond to LA, who gave it to somebody, and how did it get out. But word started to get out, word of mouth. So the next thing they did, I wish I had a live photo, but they took this and they made it into a city bus. And you won't be able to see it too well. Because essentially, this enormous billboard, this is called a bus wrap. I've learned all this lingo. And they wrapped this bus. And it cost a lot of money to wrap this bus. It was like $7,000. But it was awesome when they did it. I mean, terrifying. I don't know who would get on a bus that says federal prison in huge letters. And they blacked out the windows. You could see from inside out. You couldn't see from outside in. But we only had money for the one bus. So the evil geniuses at the advertising agency, what did they do? They convinced the city to change its route every day. So the criminals thought, right? It was 7 buses. Because they saw it everywhere. And a lot of people that we've talked to called it that damn bus. I keep seeing that damn bus everywhere. Well, I've told these guys, I almost saw that damn bus like this one day. I'm crossing the street and it comes, you know how they come around and they don't care about the walk signs. All of a sudden the death bus is right in front of me. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die under the Exile bus. So I leaped out of the way. But everybody saw it all over the place. And it generated tremendous word of mouth because it was really scary looking. We have them, and you probably do in Detroit too, we had some that looked like Jeeps and that they used them to advertise different things and movies, but there never been one like this that had our slogan on it. So the next thing, our big move was into electronic advertising. By this point, there was enough word of mouth that we were trying to do some fundraising. And that was tricky because I, as a federal prosecutor, could not raise funds. There were ethical concerns that the Department of Justice had about that. And so what we would do is we try and get ourselves in a room with the people with money in Richmond, the business community, where we would talk and explain to them the problem. But we needed somebody to, when we left the room, to say, you got to give some money or they're going to lock you up. And remember that guy, the lawyer, who ended up marrying the woman at advertising? He paid the price because we asked him to be the head of a non-profit organization called the Project Exile Citizen Support Foundation. And a tax-exempt contribution to it was a charitable contribution. He set all that up, and he recruited people from the faith community, from the business community, from abroad, and law enforcement to be on the board. And they were then in charge of raising funds for this. So the two-step would be, we'd explain to the business people, look, here's the problem. Here's what we're going to do. Here's why we think it will work. And then we promised something that meant a lot to the business community. We said, we'll come back in 6 months and tell you what we've done. And then we'll come back every 6 months thereafter and give you a report. And then we left the room, and they raised money. That had tremendous appeal to the business community because they had complained for a long time about sort of what they thought were fuzzy-wuzzy approaches to crime. You know, we didn't necessarily agree with them, but what they liked about our pitch was it was like a business pitch. Problem, solution, how to measure results, and we said to them, here's how we're going to measure. We're going to report to you on gun seizures in Richmond. We're going to report to you on violent crimes with firearms in Richmond. We think if this works, the numbers will go down. They have to go down. Certainly, it was almost impossible for them to go up, but we think they will drop significantly. And promise of follow-up. And so that's what happened. And the money started to come in. We got a big nut of money. Well, we didn't actually in the first year. It sort of dripped in from people who own local businesses and the Retail Merchants Association of Richmond and the Chamber of Commerce. After about a year of doing this, on the same day, I don't know why it happened on the same day, in the spring of 1998, after a year, we got letters of endorsement from the NRA and Handgun Control, Inc., the Brady Group, which was a gift to us because one of the things the business community had been very nervous about was, is this political? We don't want to get involved in something that's political. You know, it's like talking about religion at the dinner table and talking about gun control in Richmond, Virginia. It was just something you just didn't talk about if you were in business because you were neutral. And what happened was, when we were endorsed by these two groups, it took politics off the table. Then we were able to say to the business community, look, everybody's for this. This is about locking up criminals with guns to try and stop people from dying in this city. And then the foundation held a golf tournament to try and raise money. And both the NRA and Handgun Control, Inc. came. And I said it was like the Palestinians and the Israelis in the same foursome. It was amazing the effect that that had. And the NRA, because they're the ones with money, kicked in some money. They kicked in $200,000 as a grant to Project Exile. And that helped us move to the next level. The first cheapo way to get the message out was traffic reports. I don't know whether it's true here in Detroit, but in a lot of places, including Richmond, the traffic reports, which you get every 10 minutes, are sponsored by somebody. They'll say, this traffic report brought to you by. And so we got them to sponsor all the traffic reports in Richmond by Project Exile with these clever taglines. Not just this tagline, but different ones. And boy, talk about annoying. Every 10 minutes you're hearing about Project Exile. But again, it generated word of mouth. And when we went to radio, we knew we were starting to reach out to the good folks because now our audience was much broader. And we had spent a year establishing this brand called Exile in the criminal community. And now we thought, you know, radio will overshoot a little bit. Advertising term that we will miss some of our target audience. But if we miss them, good people will hear about this. And that's not a bad thing. And then the big move came in television. Because we still didn't have much money, and TV is hugely expensive, we produced locally some cheapo ads that were black and white, and that we got television stations to run through the good offices of that Martin agency. Because they're a huge advertising agency, they place a lot of advertisement with TV stations. So they went to all the TV stations and said, look, here's what we'll do. For every 2 minutes we buy for our private customers, we want you to give 30 seconds or a minute of free advertising for Exile. And they worked these deals. And some of the television stations really embraced it as a way of bringing in business. They said to their corporate customers, if you advertise with Fox, we will do free Exile advertising. We're the good people. Because there's tremendous competition among the television stations in the local market. And so then we went on with those cheapo commercials. And then we got famous somehow. I forget when we got famous, but it was about 2 years or 2.5 years into it. And then Hollywood wanted to be part of it, which was a great thing. And we were contacted by some young directors and producers in Los Angeles who wanted to help us do commercials. And so they produced, we could finally afford color commercials. And so we sent out a bunch of the chief's officers and others to, some of them were out there to explain the program to these people. And they built us sets, which I'm going to show you how the commercials came out, and produced commercials. Always the same tagline, an illegal gun gets you 5 years in federal prison. They were concerned, though, that the message was going to get stale and that people would start to ignore it, so they did something else. They went red. All they did was not change the message. All they did was all the billboards suddenly were red, and people looked at them again. And then they did something else. These people are just geniuses. They showed me these studies that showed that people look at a billboard for an average of a second or less. But people stand at gas pumps, on average, they had, I forget the number, like 47 seconds or something, or even longer. And so they took these, and we figured out that the highest crime precincts in Richmond, identified the 25 gas stations that were in those, and they put these pump toppers in red on the top of the gas pumps. And, you know, the police used to joke, you know, well, none of our guys have licenses, they've all been suspended, but they're still driving. Or they're driving with friends, and they're sitting there, there's nothing to do at the gas pump, and they're looking at the red Exile thing. So, the brand was firmly established. There are all kinds of great anecdotes. And my personal favorite is a guy who got 7 years. Remember I said some people are going to get more than this? The guy that got 7 years wrote a letter to the U.S. Attorney. And in it he said, the damn ad says 5. True story. And so we had all kinds of fun with that. Because we thought, you know, do you refund? Did he keep his receipts? But we told the advertising people it's the first campaign you've ever designed where we want the customers to be unhappy. That our goal is to make them fear us. So, like all good advertising, what happened in Richmond was a real cultural change was affected by this outreach. That Exile became a brand, the gun did become a liability. Now, Richmond saw a dramatic drop in crime, and I don't know what proportion of that is attributable to Project Exile. I'm quite confident part of it is, because what do I know? I know from talking to these criminals who came in and pled guilty and cooperated, that everybody became afraid of guns. And they started to become the way New York City's drug dealers are, which is from decades of very aggressive gun enforcement in New York. Everybody still has access to a gun, and people still get killed. But the guns, someone in the gang's in charge of the guns. They're kept in a special place, in a special house. They are never carried in the car unless you are really going to kill somebody. Because if you get caught with a gun, it's a huge problem. And that started to happen in Richmond. We started to see our cases come down. We started to see fewer and fewer and fewer cases, which is what we had hoped. Because if we figured that Richmond's only so big, how many guys can there be with guns? But that if people stop carrying, the numbers will come down. So, that's where we were coming up on the summer of 1999, when Virginia responded to all the attention given to this program by significantly toughening the state's gun laws to create a presumption against release, a presumption in favor of detention for certain gun possession crimes, and to impose a 5-year mandatory minimum for a variety of gun crimes, particularly for people who possess a gun with heroin or cocaine. And the effect was for David Hicks and I and Jerry Oliver to sit down and say, okay, we went with the feds do it all model because the local system was simply overwhelmed and also not imposing the kind of punishment that we needed. We had been reviewing every gun case to see if it fit federal criteria. So let's adopt a new model. We want to hit people where they will get hit the hardest. So we put together a committee of people to review every single gun arrest in the city of Richmond for one of David's folks and one of my folks to say, okay, where will this guy get hit the hardest? State court or federal court? And we started then dividing them up that way. A number of them stayed, in fact a large number of them stayed in the state system where the guys would get banged under the state law, and where either there was not a parallel state crime or there was a punishment that would be much more severe in federal court or something, we moved them to federal court. And so the federal numbers dropped even more. And that's the model that is still pursued today in Richmond, Virginia. Let me show you the ads. Then I want to talk to you about some of the challenges from a federal prosecutor's perspective to doing a program like this. Now, typically we've got these on the tape backwards. I'm going to show you the fancy ones first, the color commercials. And you should be able to see. 5 years, your life for the next 5 years when you get caught with an illegal gun. Report illegal guns, Project Exile 780-1000. Don't watch this after a couple of drinks. Your life for the next 5 years when you get caught with an illegal gun. Report illegal guns, Project Exile. And let me just say a word about this for a second. One of the real geniuses who worked on this campaign was a very hugely talented young African-American ad writer who was passionate about the notion that we were not shocking the good community enough. He said, look, you shocked the bad community, but there's still so much complacency in Richmond, Virginia. He said, I want to write a commercial that will, boom, hit people between the eyes. And so he wrote this commercial, and they showed it to us, and all of us had significant concerns about it. And we ran it. Very, very powerful, and had the effect he predicted it would have. People were not angry about it, people were stunned by it and talked about it. This that I'm about to show you generated as much word of mouth in the good folks in Richmond as the other stuff did in the criminals. Let me show it to you.
This is me. This is my mommy. And this is my daddy.
Since 1995, 216 children have lost their fathers to illegal guns. Report illegal guns. Project Exile 780-1000. Okay, next are the two cheapo commercials that we started with. That's Richmond. Says crickets. Nice, isn't it? This next one is an actual police tape.
Operation Exile. If you're caught with a gun and you're a convicted felon, like in your case, the feds come in and they take the case from us, and it's a 5-year bid. If you want to help yourself out, now's the time. But you got to be honest with us. I am. I'm trying to be honest. Okay. I want to. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Where'd you get the guns from?
Let me talk for a second about some of the challenges that we faced, that I faced as a federal prosecutor. And then what we're going to do is David Hicks is going to talk to you about some of the challenges, very different from mine, that he faced as an elected prosecutor in the state system. One of the things we encountered early on in my office was the federal prosecutors did not want to do this work because my guys and gals didn't become federal prosecutors to do stupid gun cases involving, the cops, who may not know the law of search and seizure and do stupid things. And all these things are actually things that I heard. But they're good people. And they became federal prosecutors because they wanted to make a difference. And so what we did was we sat down as a group and we talked about Richmond and what would make a difference in Richmond. And I explained to them that my view of what a federal prosecutor is supposed to do is like a free safety in football. I follow the play, and I make a hit where it needs to be made. The main line of defense are the police officers and the local prosecutors. In different communities, that free safety responsibility is different. In New York, what do? I do terrorism, I do securities fraud, I do a lot of international crimes. I don't do as much in terms of gun enforcement and small drug case enforcement because I have 5 DAs in the city of New York, and they're hugely aggressive and have very powerful state statutes. Every U.S. attorney is different and should be different on what they focus on. I said, look, in Richmond, Virginia, what do they need us to do? You know, they don't need us to do terrorism. They don't need us to do big fraud cases. They need us to try and make a difference. And I said to them, look, why'd you become federal prosecutors? You want to make a difference in your community. You can save lives in this community. These are stupid little gun cases, but each of these cases is a homicide that maybe just happened or is about to happen. That there's simply no excuse for this fellow to have a gun. So we had a group, I mentioned Dave Schiller, who was fired up, didn't need to be talked to, but that enthusiasm became contagious. And I personally tried some of these cases, and the troops got fired up about it. And as people started to see Richmond's numbers drop, and the project got attention, it was a very, very positive thing, and people really embraced it. Law enforcement community. Richmond was blessed, nothing to do with me, with a very, very close-knit law enforcement community. State, local, federal. ATF had only 8 agents in Richmond. They put almost everybody on this, and they were the mouse that roared. And I can't say enough about them. And I keep teasing them, saying, I'm so glad you're coming to the Department of Justice. I can hug you even closer. But they put their people on it. State police put their people on it. And obviously the police department, the command structure, Jerry and the others were passionate about it. And they worked together beautifully. They had to do things like get headquarters at ATF to approve a short turnaround form for doing their normal case reports, because it was taking too long to send a report to Washington to get it approved, to send it back. We needed some sort of short form to do it. So I can't say enough about how well they worked together. And the reason they worked so well together is something Hubert talked at the beginning. Everybody knew that nobody was stepping out on anybody else. Anytime there was a press conference, everybody was there. And there would not be a press conference if somebody had a cold and couldn't make it. So ATF, state police, FBI, Richmond police, elected prosecutor, U.S. attorney. We always stood together because credit is indeed the coin of the realm in law enforcement. And if somebody starts stealing it, then it gets real ugly real fast. And this was not about credit. Now, another big challenge was the police department. I said the command structure was very enthusiastic. The officers were not, because they thought this is just the feds with another stupid program that they're looking to get attention on, and they'll never be back. And so we went to every roll call, gave out the cards, and made the same pitch we made to the business community. We promise we'll be back in 6 months. And we came back. And then we came back, and we came back to every roll call and talked to every police officer. And it took a while to turn them around, because they were so used to the state system where the judges didn't take these crimes seriously, where the juries appeared not to take these crimes seriously. And they thought it's a waste of time. And they became some of our biggest supporters. Now let me talk about the toughest audience of all, federal judges. Federal judges, a great joke that I hope there are no federal judges in the room. All this is being taped. I don't think this is funny. It said, what's the difference between God and a federal judge? Well, God doesn't think he's a federal judge. The big challenge, because all federal judges, even those who started out as prosecutors, somehow developed this internal detector for what's an appropriate federal case. And they had this notion, some of them do, that they should only be handling major terrorism matters, antitrust cases, huge international fraud cases, and that certain cases are beneath the dignity of the federal court and should be handled by the local court. And we had 4 federal judges in Richmond. One said, look, I read the Constitution, and it says, you're the executive branch, you decide what to prosecute, I'll just judge it. God bless him, he retired, unfortunately. Then we had another judge who was the same way. He said, great idea, I want to make a difference in the community. He happened to be African American. He said, I love this community, I think it's a terrific idea. I'll let you know if I change my idea when the first judge retires and the workload jumps up significantly. And then we had 2 in the middle, one who became one of Exile's most outspoken critics. And Dave Hicks will give you some perspective on that. But did a number of things, including holding my boss, the U.S. Attorney, in contempt over a procedural problem in a particular case. did not go to jail. It's a bad thing for U.S. attorneys to go to jail. But it was a big, big struggle because my people had to go in there and endure the slings and arrows of this guy who just kept wailing on us, saying it was bad, it was awful. I like to say with tongue in cheek that if we achieved nothing else, I think he's probably 75, we brought to him late in life, I think, a concern for the minority community because he seized upon the fact that most of the people being locked up under exile were African American and said, maybe the program's unconstitutional because of that. Not something that had ever bothered him earlier in life, but he hated the program so much that he was all over this. Among the other issues we confronted were the police officers didn't like being in front of him. And it's hard. Detroit's a big city, and so is New York. But in a smaller community, we've only got a few federal judges. They can cause you a world of pain. I had hoped that our judges would embrace it and say, I'm a federal judge because I want to make a difference in my community. And what an opportunity this is. The absolute opposite response happened in the second city to do Project Exile, and that was Rochester, New York, where their chief judge called the U.S. attorney and said, I heard about this Project Exile. I want it. I want it done here. We have too many criminals with guns on the streets. I want to see if the federal courts can make a difference. So that was the big problem in our audience was that. The other problematic audience I touched on earlier, and that was the business community. It took some work to energize some elements of the business community for reasons that David Hicks will touch upon. Because most of our business leaders were white folks who did not view this as their problem. Because, as I said, Richmond is a very safe city in most parts. And it was hard to energize the community, that community, to care about this problem. The challenge of Project Exile going forward was simply to preserve the energy, to keep people passionate about it, because Richmond's numbers dropped so dramatically that people started to think we'd fix that problem, and there was no issue that we had to deal with any longer. And my successor down there has a big challenge ahead, as I'm sure as David Hicks does, in maintaining the momentum and keeping people serious about it. But the cultural change we hope was made permanent. We hope the state judges view it differently. We hope very much that jurors at all levels, state and federal, view it very differently, because they now have been drilled into them that gun possession is a huge problem. And I'll leave you with an analogy, I think, that illustrates that cultural change. In Richmond in 1996, people divided the mental room of criminals into two groups. On this side of the room, they moved, in their mind's eye, murderers, robbers, and rapists, and said, those guys are awful, and they should put them away. Okay. This side of the room are those guys who were just caught with a gun. They just had a gun. And so that was something that we didn't really focus on because we're getting these guys. And what has happened in Richmond, Virginia over the last 5 or 6 years is there's been a cultural shift in the minds of everybody who's thought about that room, and that is criminals, judges, juries, cops, and prosecutors. Now people think, wait a minute, these guys are going to be over here. These guys are a homicide waiting to happen. And if we attack this, if we consider this a crime of violence at all levels of the criminal justice system, maybe we'll have fewer guys on this side of the room. So that's a very, very positive thing. And what I think is the proudest legacy of Project Exile is the way people look at guns. And I feel like I'm getting my picture taken thousands of times. So anyhow, so when I leave you now, I'd like to introduce you to, and you're going to notice, I think, that part of what was special about Richmond was we were lucky to have people who personally liked each other. That the three of us were good friends made it a lot easier. But we built that friendship from constantly having breakfast where the last guy to come to breakfast had to pay. So I was sleeping in my car at the restaurant so I didn't have to pay. But that investment was endless breakfast at that awful River City diner that I paid for. That built that friendship and that relationship so that we knew, and Dave's going to talk to you, he was elected. Nobody has to vote for me except the president. And that he faced special challenges from that, and that friendship was something I'll always cherish and something that made it work. So thank you for your time, and I'll introduce you to David Hicks.
Good morning. As you can see, one of the hard things about speaking behind Jim is you have to move the mic. It's so tall. First, I want to reiterate one of the things that Jim said. One of the best things about Project Exile was that Jerry, Jim, and myself were very good friends. One of the worst things about Project Exile, as far as exporting it to other places, was that Jerry, Jim, and I were good friends. And trust is something that too often really gets discounted as the importance of it, the coin of the realm to make things happen. That's just such an interesting thing, to make things happen. One of the things is, over the years, we've gotten to speak together a lot of times. The bad thing about it is that we steal each other's jokes, and that's always good, because the person that goes last sits there and writes a lot of notes because he wants to see which the other guy steals all his stuff, and you'll see Jerry getting ready to write in a minute because I'm getting ready to steal one of his. Just as a sort of a backdrop, I want to tell a story about having to go to a doctor. And went to the doctor, took my wife with me. And the doctor was a fraternity brother of mine. So, I thought he was doing, I think he thinks he thought he was doing me a favor. So he pulls my wife to the side and says, look, I've got some test results back on Dave, and I'm really concerned. I think we caught this in the early stages, but we're really going to have to be aggressive. And excuse my voice because I'm catching a cold. We're really going to have to be aggressive to address this, because otherwise it could really, really be bad. We're going to have to remove all the stress from his life. We're just going to have to be like, well, what do you mean? What do we have to do? He said, well, first thing you have to do is every morning, you got to get up bright and early. And you got to get up, get out of bed, and make a hot breakfast for him, and just bring it to bed, and just feed him breakfast in bed every morning. He's like, then every afternoon, lunchtime, you got to meet him at home at lunchtime. And you got to make him a hot lunch, send him on back to work, a hot lunch, And the third thing is, just don't pester him about anything with the kids. Don't make him help you drop them off to daycare in the morning. Don't worry about daycare pickup in the afternoon at 6 o'clock, man. Don't put him to bed yourself, give him the baths. Just let him rest. And the last thing, last thing, very personal, but you're really gonna have to just go back to the honeymoon days. And you're just going to have to make love to whatever he wants to, just however he wants. You're just going to have to do all this because I'm telling you about. It's important. If we don't do this, it's really serious. He could die. So I'm driving home, sitting there, looking out the window, humming, it's rocking back and forth. I'm like, babe, so Doc talk to you? Nods, I was like, well, what did he say? She looks over to me, she says, well, Doc says you're going to die. One of the problems that we face in the criminal justice system, and let me point out, that the criminal justice system, especially in a place that has historic issues, is a place where all the rubber meets the road. Political decisions of the past, racial decisions of the past, economic decisions of the past, very emotional issues when it comes to public safety. It is where the rubber meets the road, and it's the place that we've been taught to be more politically correct and not talk about things and dance around the issues, which you can never do if you're going to truly make a difference. But sometimes it's hard to do if you don't have the coin of trust to make those discussions happen. Richmond, Virginia is the capital of Virginia. As such, politics there is taken very seriously. As a matter of fact, it's a blood sport. Richmond, Virginia was also the capital of the Confederacy, so I stretch the imagination not a little bit by saying that we still fight the Civil War there every day. I mean, it's just amazing. One of the most amazing things is still in the year 2002, we still have discussions almost exclusively in black and white as if no other racial ethnic group exists. And it just amazes me. Richmond is an amazing city because of the political decisions from the 60s and the 70s. And let me back up and explain one of the big differences about Virginia, which is politically very significant. Virginia is one of the few states in the Union that has independent cities and counties. So I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up in a town called Plainfield, which was in Union County, and the county prosecutor handled the big thing. Everyone always knows someone Plainfield. The county prosecutor, knows, does the bigger cases, and the local prosecutor does it, et cetera, et cetera. Richmond has independent cities and counties, which means the city of Richmond, 62 square miles, is surrounded by 2 other counties, and they have an elected counterpart. And the fact that they are bigger because of all the urban flight in the 60s and 70s, all of the social issues remained in the center city. And unlike most other major urban areas, there is no political or economic responsibility to share those. So literally, when I took office, and I laugh, and I tell people I have a job that no one else wants, and I'm obviously masochistic for having to run a tough election to get it. When I took office in 1994, the city of Richmond, which has 200,000 people, Commonwealth, Virginia, 7 million. The city of Richmond has 3% of the state's population. In 1994, we had 160 homicides that year. Now, except for Richmond, Virginia is a very safe state. So 160 homicides, 3% of the state's population, represented 28.8% of the state's homicides. Almost 1 in 3 homicides in the Commonwealth of Virginia occurred in the 62 square miles that was our home of Richmond. Our surrounding counties, respectively, had 9 and 20 homicides that year, despite the fact that they each had over 230,000 residents. We, in the center city, as in all center cities, were left to clean up the dirt that other people dropped, without the economic resources to deal with it. I'm probably not saying anything that's unfamiliar to people in this room. One of the things that happened, interestingly enough, and one of the saddest things, is the first battle that was won, and the most important battle that was won, was a battle that too many of the individuals, the business community, the quote-unquote good people, when we were having over 100 homicides a year from 1988 it began, the problem was, it was those people over there doing that stuff, killing each other. And it really didn't affect the lives of your average Richmonder. As a matter of fact, Richmond is situated very interestingly, such that most individuals who drive back and forth to work, go about their business, never actually even have to see the areas that keep us busy all day long. And they don't have to go out of their way not to do it. It's just not where they go. As a matter of fact, one particular intersection, Lynn Haven and Acton Avenue, was good for, as the Ford bodies that Jim talked about, was literally good for between 9 and 12 homicides a year. Just bodies found on the street. Now, you know what? Most of the citizens in Richmond had no idea where Lynn Haven and Acton Avenue was. And as a matter of fact, if they were there, that was probably probable cause to pull them over. Because like, what are you doing here? You must be up to something, because otherwise you wouldn't even be here. Those were the issues. Now, I would love to tell you, because I've lost all political correctness, I would love to tell you that, really one of the major impetuses for us just having enough had to do with the fact that the good people just finally said enough's enough. But I don't think I'd be telling the truth. I think for many years what was happening in Richmond, Virginia, even though we still had over 100 homicides, they were mostly young African-American males killing each other, I think what was happening was it really didn't affect the lives of most people. And interestingly enough, an interesting phenomenon happened in the mid-90s that the Wall Street Journal discovered Richmond's crime problem. But all of a sudden it became bad for business for Richmond. And probably, more than anything else, that was one of the initial sparks that got us going. However, I will take credit that we were very fortunate to have been folks that could seize upon that spark and could get a good fire going, which we all benefited from. What we never do is we never come to tell people, look, this is what you need to do it like we did. What I tell people all the time is what Project Exile represented, more than anything else, is Project Exile represented the state, local, federal branches of government and all the different agencies inside, working together, putting aside turf issues, not necessarily holding hands, singing kumbaya, working together, putting aside turf issues towards a singular goal of trying to make the lives of people better. Now, most of the people in this room recognize that you are talking about some serious heavy lifting. However, one of the things I always tell people is sometimes we have to make sure that we back up and look at things not through the universe that we always see it, but that we back up and look at it through the universe of the people who are most affected and through their eyes. Jim talked about one time when we were in this particular federal judge's courtroom. And on this particular day, this federal judge had his best dream come true. A defense attorney had summoned Jim and I because he had made the motion that Project Exile was unconstitutional because it disproportionately had African American males as its defendants. So he summoned both Jim and I to the stand. Judge was salivating, defense attorney was salivating. Now, Pam Evans, who's in the room, was an assistant Commonwealth attorney, deputy Commonwealth attorney by the time she left in my office. And she will tell you that one of the things I always told my lawyers, look, I want you to stand up to the judges and be firm, stay on your side of the lines, as far as being polite, but stand up and be firm, because I always keep $50 in my pocket. I'll bail you out of jail. That's my line. I was tough, it wasn't me. So I always keep 50. Now I'm sitting up in court, federal court, I'm like, I don't know if this 50 in my pocket is going to get me out of federal jail. I don't know what I don't know what it's going to take. Now, one of the other things Hubert said, Jim was right there, because, and I'll tell some stories, one of the things about a partnership, if you're going to have a real partnership means you're there for each other in the bad times. And if you're there for each other in the bad times, the good times is easy. But you know, when the blame is coming and when the heat's coming, you look around, nobody's there, you don't have a partnership. You've got some other type of relationship, call it what it is, move about your business, but you don't have a partnership. So there we are in federal court. This judge has got me on the stand. And interesting enough, this was even after things started turning around. And I will tell you the end of the story is last year, we had 69 homicides in Richmond, Virginia. Okay? So this is right about 98, 99, when we got under 100 for the first time in 10 years. Boom. And the judge calls me to the stand, and he was like, and you know, like I said, I'm from New Jersey, but my friend was originally from Georgia, and probably genetically I'm predisposed to have a little bit of a real nervous reaction when I hear a very heavy southern drawl, especially coming from a position of authority. I'm not going to pretend I don't. So I'm sitting there, and he's like, Mr. Hicks. Got that thing, got to shake it off. And he's like, Mr. Hicks, do you think it's fair that the people, and I think he said Idaho or something, that the people in Idaho have to use their federal tax dollars to pay for cleaning up Richmond's crime? Put my hand on that 50. I wondered if it was going to be enough. I was like, well, Judge, let me tell you something. I don't know, but all I can say is this. When I took office, we had 160 homicides. Last year, we had 98. Now, I don't know the value of any one of those lives. And I can tell you as a citizen, I pay state taxes, I pay federal taxes. And my belief of government is that the number one responsibility of government is to protect and make safe the citizens. And when government does that, I don't think the citizens rightfully care if it's the state or the feds or the locals that do it. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think we're making a difference. And I don't know if the people out in Idaho would care enough, but I think it's worth it. I didn't go to jail that day, so, you know, I guess it wasn't so bad. One of the things that you have to decide you want to do to make any system, any strategy that you come up with, and I really shy off of the word programs, because it really just sounds like if I don't want to do anything different, I'll just wait a little while. One of the things that you do is you come up with a strategy of how you operate. As a trial lawyer, you have a theory of your case, and you never do anything inconsistent with that theory. You have to have a theory of how you operate. One of the problems, unfortunately, in many of our neighborhoods is our theory of law enforcement is inconsistent with what the neighbors think that they can get behind. And then we dance around it and get politically correct. One of the things we have always said in Richmond is we cannot arrest or prosecute our way out of the problem. Now, does that sound inconsistent coming from someone who had a program with billboards that says this particular crime will get you 5 years? I say not. Because let me explain something to you as far as numbers. One of the numbers, and one of the things quite interesting about Project Exile is throughout its use, one of the things that never happened in the city of Richmond is we never had a sermon preached against us for Project Exile, despite the fact that an overwhelming majority of our defendants were young African-American males, the same people who were getting killed and the same people who were killing them. And the reason, I believe, is this. When Jim says that the height of Project Exile, we prosecuted 250 some odd defendants. Now, at first blush, that sounds like, ooh, that's a lot. But let's back up. 250 defendants. My office closes 6,000 felonies a year. 250 defendants, especially in the context of what we usually do in quote-unquote drug war endeavors, is a pittance. We'll run 250 defendants through an buy-bust operation in a weekend. What we did, and one of the things that made this so important, was we started from the position of trying to see it through the eyes of the people. One of the things about any program that you do is if it gets too far away from the people, it is going to fail. I went to the University of Virginia for my undergraduate and my law school education, so you went to the University of Virginia. It was founded by Thomas Jefferson. You cannot have a speech without quoting Mr. Jefferson or one of his theories at least one time. I have to do that. Like I said, I went there, I'm still paying back student loans. That's one of the reasons. I'm an elected official, you got to quote Jefferson. That's the second reason. Jefferson might be family, so I want to give him his props. That's the third. One of the things that Jefferson says is that for leadership, leadership cannot be more than 2 steps ahead of the people. If you're more than 2 steps ahead of the people, you lose relevance and the people will not follow you. If you are only with the people, you are not a leader and the people do not need you. To find out what it is that the people need, you have to check yourself at the door. I was very fortunate. I had to run a very, very tough political campaign to achieve this particular office. So talking to the people, figuring out what it is that they needed, what it is that they thought they wanted, and trying to be very much like a doctor when you present yourself to them, that you come, you present the history, and you don't tell the doctor, and I want this particular medicine. Some people try, but usually if you write that prescription, you're going to get in trouble as a doctor. You then apply your knowledge, your expertise to come up with a treatment and a solution that will then address the problem. I was very fortunate, and I had something to do with it, that I had a hand in Jerry Oliver coming to Richmond, and I remember going with the then city manager out to Pasadena to get Jerry. Jerry Oliver truly believes in community policing, not just the talk, but the walk. So when Jerry came to Richmond, Jerry Oliver, you would have thought, was running for political office. Having run for it, I recognize the symptoms of what's going on here. Jerry literally would go in the neighborhoods, sit in he would find the key person in the neighborhood, sit in their living room and tell them, you just have a couple people over. No, I'm not going to bring an entourage, it's going to be me, and I'll bring one other officer with me. Finding out what the people wanted, talking to the people, being out there with the people, so we did not become an occupying force, just bringing another, oh, we're going to hit them hard. We stayed within those 2 steps of the people. So when we made the attempt to change the culture, we were not just coming from someplace else. What I want to say is this. The stories that we have from Exile, the political challenges, the racial challenges, all the things that you have in any community that has a crime problem can be addressed. And there is only one magic ingredient, or really 2, 3. Trust, communication, and commitment. Finding out what the problem truly is cannot happen without candid dialogue. Working together to get to that solution cannot happen without trust. And making it happen, especially in a place where you have an entrenched problem, is not going to happen without almost missionary zeal from someone. And that missionary zeal will make you overcome the issues of working together across state, federal lines. Of dealing with that first time that you think someone disses you because they didn't have you standing close enough to them to the podium, and then you go back to your office and your people are saying, oh, you got dissed. But if you remember who you're doing it for, the people who are truly paying our salaries, the people, as opposed to the people we usually spend our time with, it makes it worthwhile. Obviously, as I close, Jim and Jerry both went on to bigger and better things. I'm still trying to figure out why they left me behind. That's a different story. But one of the things that we have seen with the departure of both of these two is now we're faced with the challenge of what do you do with good people in place, but still who haven't shown that missionary zeal to take it to the next level. And it has been a challenge. So hopefully we can get that fire lit a little bit more. But that's what it takes. And supporting the people to make that happen is what it takes. So thank you very much for having us here. Tough gun enforcement works. I think it's the new frontier. I think it's a frontier that we should have delved on long ago. I think it's the place that keeps the people behind you in ways that some of our drug efforts over the past 10 years have taken them away from us. So it's a good task, and it's a task worthwhile. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. We're going to be serving lunch shortly. Before we break, we want to complete our program. Chief Oliver, I would ask you to address for us, at least in part, the importance of the community element here in developing a successful gun suppression and violence program. Community is a factor sometimes. Often in law enforcement, we deal with responsibilities and duties and things like that. We're enforcing the law. But this thing can get out of hand and out of control and get undermined if the community isn't fully on board. How do you keep the community on board?
Good. Thank you, Hubert. Still good morning, everyone. I'm really excited about this conversation that we're having this morning, and I would like to kind of help put it right in perspective. Mr. Williams started out talking about why we're here to talk about Project Exile, and basically the elements that went into a successful program in a place called Richmond, Virginia. I want to make sure that we connect the dot from Richmond, Virginia to Detroit, and why we're here talking about Project Exile, which is really the forerunner of a program that we announced several months ago, called Project Safe Neighborhoods. So, to use a phrase from Frederick Douglass, the struggle continues, but the commitment is real. The struggle continues here in Detroit in terms of gun violence and the violence that we've experienced of late in this community. But the commitment has to be real, and the commitment that we're talking about is a similar commitment that we had in Richmond, Virginia. Commitment to make a difference with this gun violence. Now, with some of the aspects that Jim has so eloquently talked about, he's described the program, described how it evolved. There are a lot of important steps that occurred in Richmond, Virginia that I think we can learn from. What David was talking about was the partnership that we had really as players in the whole Project Exile experience. We all brought a certain commitment, we brought a certain passion to the table. Not only the three of us that are here, but other people as well that were involved. Jim mentioned some of the business community, the religious community, people like yourselves in the room who came to the table and said, we see it, we feel it, we're feeling you, and we're going to get involved and we're going to make a difference. And a difference really was made, a serious difference was made. And I hope that what we take away from the conversation that we're having here today is the possibility that that same kind of serious difference can be made here in our city. This is not hopeless. It is not a situation that's out of control. It's a situation that is addressable. But it's addressable only with the kind of commitment, the kind of creativity that we've been talking about in this room. And another thing that I guess as we've traveled around the country, my responsibility has been to sort of bring it back to the ground level about what community policing is. Project Exile was a very aggressive program to prosecute, to first of all arrest, detect, arrest, and prosecute individuals who would carry a gun and use a gun in our community. As has been indicated, the large majority, the overwhelming majority of the individuals that were arrested were African Americans. They were African American males because they were African American males using weapons against other African American males. It was like black on black crime. But still, when you step away from that, you step back from it, the idea that what the judge was saying, that David was talking about, and a lot of other people were saying or wanted to say, was this program is just targeted at arresting black folk. It's just arresting young African American males. Look at the jails and look at the number of the percentage of young people that are locked in jail, and why are they there? So what I want to say, I guess, is, excuse me, just to remind everybody that community policing is very, very important, and you don't fix your roof the day it rains. That you really start early on. And what happened, although we're talking about Project Exile, there was forerunners to Project Exile in Richmond, Virginia. From the day I arrived as police chief, we started to change the way we did business with the community. Excuse me. We recognized that, for instance, that what had happened was a monologue between the police and the community. Basically, it was the police talking to the community and telling the community what it was going to do. When we had an initiative, an aggressive initiative, no matter what that initiative was, it was really the police department that came to the community and said, this is what we're going to be doing in your community. And it was a monologue. What we attempted to do immediately, and what we've been attempting to do here in Detroit, is to change that to a dialogue, so that we actually seek permission from the residents in the community to do the kind of police work that we needed to do. So that, in reality, Project Exile was successful because the community allowed us to be successful. It could have been thwarted. The whole thing could have been stopped by the community because of people resisting. Let me tell you the story. I want to tell this story if I could. There was an interesting situation that occurred that probably would have been a week, 2 week, maybe a 3 week story in any other city. In Richmond, we had what's called the police chief's worst nightmare to occur. Middle of the night, phone ring. It's one of our public information people calling and said, Chief, a young lady by the name of Christy Green, who's a mom, she's 19 years old, was just killed by your SWAT team, by our SWAT team. The SWAT team was serving a search warrant or an arrest warrant on an individual that was a drug dealer. They wind up doing the process of this warrant, actually shot and killed this individual. Young mom, young black female, did not have anything to do with the arrest warrant. She was an incidental victim, collateral damage. So of course, you know what went through my mind when that happened. Oh my God, how do we, who's rolling, who's there, how's it being managed? But as it turned out, these police officers, which were all white officers, by the way, on a SWAT team, serving a search warrant, arrest warrant in a black community, went there, basically used a breaching round, which is a round shot from a shotgun on the doorknob to blow the door open to go in to make the arrest. It wasn't a battering ram or any of that. It was a breaching round. All of the other times that we've used that round, when it hit the doorknob, it disintegrated into dust, into powder. And just the force of the powder blew the door open. On this particular occasion, the door was a hollow core door. And when they shot the round, it did not disintegrate. A large piece of it went through the door and struck this young lady in the chest, killing her instantly. As I said, this probably in any other city would have been a major issue. The trucks would have rolled in with the big dishes, All the news reporters would have been there. It would have been interviewing the family, the tears, the whole thing about how remiss the police department is, how brutal we are, how insincere we are in terms of community policing. That did not happen. You did not, in Detroit, read about this situation in Richmond, Virginia, as I read about like Malice Green and other kind of cases. And the reason why you didn't read about it is because instantly, when that happened, a group of citizens in the community stepped up to the plate and said, yes, these are citizens that lived in the neighborhood. Yes, a bad thing happened. Christy Green was killed while these police officers were serving the arrest warrant. But we want to go on record, excuse me, we want to go on record in saying that we support what the police department was trying to do, that we understood because they had already told us that they were going to try to make this arrest of this individual who was very violent and who had created a lot of crime when he was selling drugs, that we were included. And not only that, but we were also included in purchasing the assault weapon that they used. And not only that, but we were also involved in the decision to use a breaching round, because we helped them select the breaching round. Police officers and citizens sat down to talk about how they wanted the SWAT team equipped, so that when that happened, they were owners of the situation and the training just as much as the police department. And so the cameras didn't have any place to go. The reporters didn't have any place to go to find somebody out there that would say something really terrible about what happened, other than the fact that, of course, everybody wanted to know, what can we do about this breaching round, and what can we do to make sure it doesn't ever happen again? But it wasn't an indictment on the police department. And I thought that that was significant. I think that was a turning point which allowed us to do a lot of the very aggressive things in the community and have the support of the community. Well, how did that happen? Very quickly, let me tell you a couple of things that we had done. And ideas that some of them you will recognize, some of them we haven't gotten to them yet here in the city of Detroit. Mike and I have started something called Blitz to Broom, which is something that's very similar to a program called Blitz to Bloom that we had in Richmond. But there were many other things that we did. We had Blitz Academies, which meant that we went to the living room, as David said, we went to the living room of people in the community. We would actually go to the living rooms and hold academies, if you will, leadership training for people in the community. A lot of times in our communities, people want to be leaders, but they don't know how to be leaders. They don't know how to lead people. We actually helped them as a police department. We went there and said, you appear to be a person with influence. You appear to be a person who want to make a difference. And with a very small group of us, not with a lot of fanfare, we came to her or his living room with 2 or 3 other people and put on training, leadership training for them, telling them about all the different resources in the community that they can be connected to. So we had these Blitz Academies. We had something called Street Talk, where we had partners for dinner. David talked about that the chief of police and other high-ranking officials would come to Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Martinez's house and have dinner. We'd bring the bucket of chicken, we'd sit around on the floor, and we'd talk about all the different problems in their community, and then we'd ask them for permission, with their permission and support, to address those problems. So that if there was a problem on the corner, down the street, with 5 or 6 or 10 kids that were hanging around, we just didn't show up as a police department. We actually sat and talked with the neighbors, the people in the area, and asked them for their permission to actually move many of them, which were their kids or their relatives, away from those corners, and how we would go about doing it. What's the best way to do it? Who could help us do that? What church leader or what community leader or what social services leader could help us actually move them so that it wouldn't be the police department out there alone in the middle of the night trying to move these kids? We had something that you've heard that transfers into something different, and that's block grants. Not block grants in the term of money coming down through the state, but if you were a leader, again, Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Jones, and you lived in the neighborhood and you were trying to get something done on your street, that you could go to city council or you could go to certain people and get $2,000. It'd be a maximum of $2,000 that you could use in your community, no questions asked, to do a better job of preventing crime or to encourage people to be involved or to hold a seminar or to hold training or to host some kind of a community event, that we would support that. So there were these little block grants that people who really wanted to do something that didn't have resources were able to get done. Citizen Leadership Awards, where we would identify and highlight citizens who have really done something to help us prior to even the Project Exile kind of a thing. And then community involvement's a big deal. Not just talking about getting people involved, but a lot of times in community policing, especially for some of the cops in the room, we know that community policing a lot of times sounds like we're going to go out there and do something. We're going to go out there in their communities to do something. We're going to go out way out there to their neighborhoods. And that's important, but what's more important in community policing is bringing people inside of the police department, bringing them inside. The reciprocity is very important. So what we're attempting to do here even, and what we were very successful at doing that, this is all prelude to Project Exile, is inviting citizens to be involved in almost every major decision that the police department was involved in. This is their police department. So issues of use of force, and the type of force, and the type of weapons, and the type of equipment, and how we should be equipped, and how we look, type of vehicles. All those were issues that police people, along with citizens, participated in. Just to tell you that how transparent the department was, or involved, inclusive the department was, the actual insignia today on the police vehicles in Richmond, Virginia was done by citizens and not the police department. The insignia itself, the way it looked, because we went to citizens and said, how would you like to see your police vehicles look in this city? And they drew the plan. It's actually kind of a silhouette of the city of Richmond, Virginia. And it's a very pretty kind of a silhouette that everybody bought into. So it was a celebration, excuse me, it was a celebration about the way in which the police vehicles appear. Disciplinary review boards, citizens involved in every decision about disciplinary review. Not domination, not oversight, but participation and involvement. They're involved in all of that. Risk management, pursuits, pursuit policy, and some of this you recognize because this is some of the things that we're doing now within the Detroit Police Department. That again are preludes to the kinds of things, the kind of aggressive initiatives that you can do with a Project Exile. Again, community policing transformed from monologue to dialogue. That every opportunity you get to have a conversation, the continuing conversation, is very, very important. David, at the beginning, said he stole my joke. And I just want to repeat the punchline on that joke. And that is, you know what? You will surely die. The punchline is that if you don't do something extraordinary, right? If you don't, make love to me passionately at night, if you don't do something extraordinary, it's going to surely die. And I'm going to tell you, in our situation here in Detroit, Project Safe Neighborhoods, we are not willing to do the extraordinary. We really step out and do something different to meet the challenge, then this program will surely die. It will surely die. And it will die not from enemy fire, but it will die from friendly fire, from apathy. So what we've got to do in terms of Project Safe Neighborhoods is not only do the aggressive piece, and we can do that. I mean, the police department, we're going to prosecute. I mean, we got Judge Collins. We're going to be able to prosecute Mike Duggan and I, and the rest of it. We'll put that part together. The key part is all the stuff that Jim Comey was talking about at the beginning, the creative stuff, the advertisement, the buses, the cards, the involvement by all the people sitting around tables like this, in this room, sitting around tables like in this room. That's the key part. So the question is, how do we get that done? And I know, Karen, that's what you've been tasked to do as well. That's the real question. How do we really get the creativity and the juices flowing on the other side so that we can start to really market Project Safe Neighborhoods like we marketed Project Exile? There were many times when I look back and I did not even recognize the program. I mean, Jim said we got famous. Well, we did get famous. We got famous because a lot of people couldn't believe that police, prosecutors, people in the criminal justice system, ATF, couldn't believe that they were involved on the other side like we were involved in terms of community policing. So that's what we've got to do, and I guess my point, my role in this is to try to bring it back to us here in the room in terms of how can we take the elements of success, all the elements of success, and there were many, from the experiences that we had with Project Exile and move them to Project Safe Neighborhoods that we're doing here in Detroit. Again, the struggle to reduce violence and reduce gun violence continues. The commitment has to be real. It can't be talked about. It's got to be real. So that's what we're here to do, to try to highlight those key elements that made that program successful, and we know that will make us successful here in Detroit. Okay, thank you.
Well, it's 11:59, and I think rather than having any further speeches at the moment, what we'll do is take a break for 10-15 minutes, give them an opportunity to set up for lunch. We'll have lunch, and there'll be some people that will be responding, U.S. Attorney, District Attorney, and others will make a few comments. Then we'll get into a discussion phase, and after that we'll have closing remarks, and we'll end our program. So, let's take our break. Thank you very much.
Needed.
My brother sells